Good evening and good morning to you, according to where you are currently located. For those who don't know me, my name is Biswajit SenGupta. I am a graduate of the 1981 batch of electrical engineering from the Institute, erstwhile known as B College. Subsequently, I studied management at IIM Calcutta. My work experience spans over 40 years in global sales, marketing, business development, and vendor relationship management of industrial products, with a short stint in manufacturing. I have been a member of GAABESU's Executive Committee 8 and currently number 9. As part of our mission to give back to our alma mater and our alumni, the Special Interest Group of General Leadership under GAABESU has arranged for today's discussion on change management, how to prepare and benefit from it. You may be just starting your career or belong to the mid to senior level category or may even be retired. No matter what, we all are constantly facing change. The point is, we cannot avoid change as it happens all the time. But the more important point is, how do we proactively prepare ourselves to face the changes or even with a change and benefit from them? I'm delighted to introduce to you all our guest speaker, Mr. Bob Vanderhoff, whom I have known for the last 14 years. And he too believes in the mission and joy of giving back. Bob brings 40 plus years of global experience in manufacturing, wholesale distribution, and home improvement industry as a CEO, COO, president, and other high level executive positions. He has also served on the board of directors for companies, trade organizations, and nonprofits. Bob has a reputation for providing leadership in change management and turning around the performance of organizations by setting strategies and aligning them with effective tactical methodologies. He has had the privilege of working in public, private, family owned, and private equity owned companies. His ability to lead changes in what people and organizations do has been the cornerstone of the successful models he has built. As the host of today's discussions, I welcome you all and thank you for joining this session. We will try to limit it to 1 hour. So, in the interest of time, it will be just Bob and me talking, and your microphones will be muted. Should you have any questions, please feel free to write those in the chat center, and we shall try to address those at the end of the session. So, without further ado, let's begin. Bob, welcome, and we appreciate you joining this session as the guest speaker. We look forward to you sharing with us your insights on managing change and benefiting from it.
Sen, thank you very
Bob?
much. I'm excited about being here and being part of this group, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Very good.
Yeah, I appreciate the introduction and the background. If I can just maybe fill in just a little bit, since I left running a company about 4 years ago, and from that I got hooked up into the University of Tennessee, where I coach in their executive MBA program. And I also work as an executive in residence for the Research Foundation at the University of Tennessee, helping inventors commercialize their intellectual property through startups. And so I've been doing that. I also was a CEO of one of those startups that we just sold and closed on the business last Friday. So it's been an exciting ride so far. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and Sen and I actually worked together at Argo International starting in 2011, and that's
Yes.
where I got introduced to him. And also, he was very important in terms of introducing me to India. And we had the opportunity to travel there. And so being in Delhi and Calcutta and Mumbai, yeah, um, I love India. I think it's a wonderful and fascinating place.
Yep. All right, Bob. Well, Bob, you and I spoke about today's session briefly in the last few days, and we thought that we would best use our time if I asked you some questions and we get the insight from your responses. So, the basis of the questions is built off the foundation of embracing change. So, let's begin. The first one is, one of the famous sayings of Jack Welch has been change before you have to. As we begin our discussion on embracing change, how would you define change and how should we understand the nature of change? There are always so many uncertainties. So, how do we embrace such uncertainties?
It's an interesting question. And so, naturally, I went to the dictionary to look up how change is defined. And basically, it says to become or make different. And so, as I think about change, and I think of the spectrum where change can be very subtle, all the way up to being very transformative. And let me give you a couple examples. Subtle would be when I looked out this morning to the neighbor's lawn across the street, I look at the grass. That grass today is not the same as it was yesterday. But
Mhm.
to me, I don't notice a difference. So it's very subtle in that regard. Or looking at the trees that have probably grown or the leaves have grown. So that's somewhat subtle. As you move across that spectrum, you go, okay, I remember when I used to go see my father when he was alive, and I'd see him about once a year, and I could notice the changes that he was getting a little bit older. And Sen, you and I could probably look at each other and go, hell, we've changed a little bit too since we've last seen each other.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And you can all go to transformative type changes, whether that is here in the US, we might think about Caitlin Clark, how she's changed women's basketball. And there's other things, the introduction of AI and how that's changing our world and stuff. So change is constant, as you indicated. And I think the idea that we talked about is how do we embrace that in a way that allows us to navigate the change? How do we use it for reaching our goals or objective? How do we use change to bring meaning into our lives and stuff? So uh, a simple thing, change is constant, uh, and it makes hopefully us different and things different as we go forward.
Yeah. But then, Bob, uh, how do we embrace such uncertainties? Because there are so many uncertainties. How do we embrace that?
Yeah, I think there's two things I think about, Sen, when you ask that question. One would be, how do you tell the difference between what is really, uh, I'll call good change or constructive change versus change that is happening just because uh, it's happening, but it might be more noise than actually change that it would be meaningful, that helps you make a difference, uh, gives you purpose, those type of things. How do you find those type of changes and identify those? And then how do you block out all the noise of things that it's changing is changing? there are certain things that I think you look at and go, hey, we need to be aware of those. We need to embrace those. There's a lot of things that might be changing that don't really make a difference in our lives. So how do you create that discernment to know the difference between what is really important and what's not? And the what not, how do you put that out and don't really necessarily worry about it? But uh, if you can accept the fact there's going to be a lot of uncertainty and address it, uh, and look for the positives of change, I think that's a constructive way of dealing with uncertainty.
Got it. So let's uh, dive a little bit deeper then. So, as we drive deeper into our understanding of change, what are some pillars of the psychology of change we should consider?
Yeah, just give me 1 second. When you think about some of the pillars of change, number one, change itself, I mean, it's a process. Change, you don't necessarily wake up today and everything's changed. It's a process, not necessarily an event. And so when you think about that in the psychology of change, you know, there's going to be apprehension about the unknown. Okay. I think
Yes.
I can think many times in my life where I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, but I can tell you my fear was a far greater than the consequence of what happened once we got to that point, right? And so, really understanding that, hey, it's a natural reaction to feel that uh, apprehension. It's natural to feel there could be a fear to that. And what does that mean? And then, how do you develop an openness to change, to new experiences, and to perspectives? For example, giving this talk today, it's not, I don't do it very often. So it creates a little bit of anxiety. But you go ahead and do it and you learn from it. Hopefully it becomes meaningful for all involved. Uh, but that's creating those new experiences. And I think looking at change, diving into it, being proactive versus being reactive is ways of dealing with change.
Okay. Well, let's talk about embracing change then. If we are going to embrace change, how should we consider change as an opportunity? And how does that help us personally and professionally?
Well, I guess, kind of go back to a conversation, Sen, you and I had. I mean, the idea of embracing change and being proactive, either you can sit back and let it happen to you, or you can be proactive and go get it, so to speak. And uh, since here in the United States, Mission Impossible came out this past week, I always think about Tom Cruise in those movies, that he always ran towards the problem. He never really ran away from the problem. And I think that kind of gives an idea of when you're thinking about change, how do you become proactive? How do you create a positive mindset that you're going to embrace this and you're going to look for the positives out of it? And not that you don't define it correctly or you don't recognize the risk to it, but you do things to mitigate the risk and look for the positives that come out of that. I always believe, Sen, that you find what you're looking for. And if you're looking for the positives and how to make it successful, you'll find that. If you look for the reasons why not, or the reasons why it won't work, you'll find those also. And so I think that's the mindset becomes really critical in doing that. Um, Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just thinking, you know, if it is an external change, in a sense that the change has taken place, and you can either react to it in various ways, but you could be proactive also, and embrace that in a certain way that you get benefit out of that, which we were talking about. But at the same time, uh, you could drive the change yourself. You could be the change agent yourself. So please tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think, it kind of goes back to a term I used earlier, and that the idea of discernment, right? And understanding what the change is all about and what role do you play in this. Uh, I could tell you during my coaching with the executive MBA programs, I'm dealing with leaders at different stages of their career. And, we talk a lot about, how do you impact, how do you influence, how do you be a catalyst for that change? And, I think it's a choice. You make a choice whether you want to do that or you're going to be or you're not going to do it or you're just going to wait to see what happens. But I think there's clearly an opportunity there to be proactive and be that catalyst if you choose to be so.
If you choose to be so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, can you give us some examples, some practical strategies for embracing change?
Yeah, I think some of it is, how do you set realistic goals of, the thing that you want to change, right? I know you mentioned, the internal changes that we want to make as people, right? I mean, that is probably more difficult than the external. At least that's been my experience, right? And so, how do you set realistic goals that, and expectations? I think that would be one. How do you create the flexibility individually and corporately to be able to adapt to change? So flexibility, adaptation is really critical. And when, I think about the term being adaptive, is not like being a balloon that you let go and wherever the wind takes it. I mean, that's not what we're talking about, but it's really recognizing from where you're at, how do I adapt to be in a position to create benefit from that change, to maybe survive the change? Those are the things I think you want to look at. The other thing
Okay.
I think is important is really finding support to help you work through the change, right? Whether it's dealing with mentors, whether it's a group, whether you're doing it individually within your family or your friends, or whether it's at work, is, how do you get people on your side to help support that change? It might provide a level of accountability to you, but it also might also give you energy that would come from that. So,
Yeah, of course. Okay. Let's talk about resistance to change. That's something we see all the time, and we see in ourselves, in others, and all the time. So Mahatma Gandhi, he said, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." Whereas Woodrow Wilson, he said, "If you want to make enemies, try to change something." By that, what he's basically saying is, if you are making a change, people may not like that, and they may turn into enemies. So we find that there is a general propensity to oppose change. Are there ways to overcome the resistance of change, both internally and from the outside?
yeah, it's a great question, Sen. I read an article by a lady, Erica uh, Anderson, and she wrote a book on change, and she developed what she called the arc of change. And basically, what you do is under the first leg of that arc is, okay, propose change and what happens. So there's three questions that we ask ourselves. What's changing for me? Why is it changing? And what will it look like? And so I look at that arc and I go, okay, when you think about points of resistance, clearly that becomes right out of the gate a point of resistance because it creates uncertainty, what's going to happen to me, those type of things. So but she also talks about, as you go above the arc, you begin to change the mindset. Now, clearly, there's a lot of things that have to happen if you're thinking about individually or you're thinking about organizations. And you go, okay, how do you change your mindset? How do you go from being this change is difficult to where it's now doable? How do you go from this is costly to it's rewarding? How do you change your mindset from this is weird to it is normal? All right. And so as you go, start going down the arc, what she's proposing is you get behavioral changes and then the change occurs. Understanding that, the resistance is going to be there. But let me give you an example. When I ran the Sears home improvement business, it took me about a month to realize that the way the business was structured, it was not, it didn't create accountability in my mind down to the customer level. So I wanted to change the structure, but I never told anybody that. What I started to do is because I recognized if I just said, hey, we're going to change this just for the sake of changing, I would get a lot of resistance. So I started by asking questions of, have we considered this? What would happen if this happened? And everything else. And about a month later, the leadership team came back to me and said, we think we should change. And so they already bought in, right? And then I gave them or to say, okay, you guys drive the change. Here's the parameters I'm going to give you to work within. If you got to go outside the parameters, raise your hand. Or if you got questions, come back to me. And it worked charm. So when we actually pulled the trigger, the whole organization was prepared, ready, accepted the change, and we communicated effectively. So
they bought in. Yeah, they bought in. And then it becomes their own idea.
Yes. Yeah. And then you empower that, versus, and I've seen, because I've gone into many companies and I've read a bunch and I've seen, when someone comes in and goes, we're going to do this, this, and this. And I go, how do you know that? Because you don't understand what the business is all about. I mean, you can, our experience coming into Argo, I spent a little bit of time trying to understand what we do, why we do it, how we do it, what's the opportunity that could be in front of us, and how do we get there, right? And so I think recognizing that the resistance is there, don't ignore it, deal with it, get people to buy into it, let them see what the benefit's going to be, answer those questions. Okay, what's it going to look like? Why? And how does it impact me? And if you can deal with those, you mitigate the resistance.
Well, so the follow-up question to that then would be that how does the power of resilience play in overcoming the resistance?
Yeah.
The resistance to change.
Yeah. Resilience, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means the ability to bounce back and recover, right? And so as we go through life, and let me just give you an example, as I mentioned, we sold the company and closed last Friday. That journey was like a Tour de France race, a 100 miles race up and down mountains and then a sprint to the end. Well, there were days where people were going, oh, you wake up and everything looks great. Everything's going great. The next morning you wake up and the world's falling apart. The deal's not going to be done. And you just go, okay, you got to have resilience. You got to have a level, hey, that's not a deal breaker. We'll get through this. And so that ability to kind of bounce back against the resistance that's going to be there or against circumstances that come up, how do you navigate around them? How do you eliminate the barriers, everything else? And again, it's not an idea that, hey, they're not there. They are there. Recognize them, call them for what they are, but then don't give them more power than what they deserve to have.
Okay. There is one question that has come up, Bob. It says, it's from Biman Ghosh. It says, understand that people resist change and how you responded to common forms of resistance in your professional life.
I would say, first of all, I always expected resistance. I never felt like, okay, just because of my position that people, even though they might say, hey, we're on board, I understand that there's reasons why there might be resistance to it. So I think the idea of number one is understand it's there. Number two, identify what it is and why it is there, whether it's someone personally is resisting because of maybe their position might be in jeopardy or whatever it might be. And then, then deal with it. Most things, if you put your head in the sand, so to speak, it doesn't change anything. And so, part of the issue of dealing with resistance is recognize it and then deal with it. And, either to mitigate it or eliminate it or find a way to get around it.
Okay. Biman has asked another question also. He has asked how you built change competency into your organization and made sure that it was sustained through different phases of your career and organizational maturity.
Yeah. I think there's two things that come to my mind. One is I think you've got to demonstrate what is that you're trying to change or what are you trying to create within an organization by what you do, because people watch what you do more so than what you say. And in that, they create, what you say and what you do. If there's a delta there, that creates a problem with credibility. So in a way, as a leader, you need to be the example of what it is you're trying to create. And then from there, I think with that, understand that the expectations that you have and what the vision of the organization or everything else is not a one and done event. You don't put out an email or you don't say it once, but you say it all the time. It has to be there, and it has to be a constant reminder to drive the organization there. And then when you have behavior that doesn't fit, then you got to address that also.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to our original set of questions, and then some more questions are pouring in. Helen Keller, we all know her. She said, a bend on the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn. That is a famous quote from her. Can we talk about the need and the power of adaptability and how it impacts our professional careers? you did talk about adaptability already, but then why is it so very much needed?
Yeah, well, I think, adaptability, there's probably some kind of mathematical correlation to change, right? I mean, if you're going to have change, you're going to have adaptability. And again, as I said, it's not about just going wherever the wind blows, but it's done through discernment as to, okay, what what is changing or what needs to change, and then how do you adapt to recognize that and to benefit from that. There was a book that I read in the mid 90s called Value Migration. And Sen, I probably talked to you about that book back when we first met. But
Yes.
the basis of the book was that the value that your customers have is going to migrate over time, or basically, maybe we could say change over time. And so, how do you get an organization to migrate or change with it? And I've taken that concept and say, okay, how do you do that as an individual, and how do you adapt going forward? And let me give you a personal example. When I left the last company I ran as the CEO, uh, well, 2 companies ago, I was faced with the question, okay, what do I do now? And how do I stay relevant? Because that is important to me, right? And so relevance to me partly is achieved through adaptability to understand, okay, what's out there, what matches up with my experience, with my talents, what matches up with what my goal is of, how do I give back? Because, Sen, as you and I both recognize, and probably people on this call, we have all benefited from people throughout our career who have helped us, in our career progressions and everything else. And so become adaptive to where I was at, was important for me to kind of find the path forward and to lead me where I'm at today.
Okay. You talked about relevance. And so, how do we use change to stay relevant? Is the question. How do we do that? Like, there was a change in your career and you did something about it to stay relevant. How do we use change to stay relevant?
But,
Or is there something that we can do?
well, I think there's something we can do. So the one thing I think about a lot is, when you think about most of it, if you talk about change, most of us might gravitate to technology as maybe the biggest thing that has changed in our lives. And you go, okay, so how do I stay relevant with technology being the driver? Uh,
Right.
and that becomes, uh, I think, an important part. But the other thing that I thought about is, with all the changes that have occurred externally, whether it's technology, all the different things, I often wonder whether we internally, and let's call it our emotional intelligence, have we maintained or have we kept up with the changes that have been externally? And you can make an argument that, with technology and social media and everything else, are we a better society today than we were 20 years ago, 50 years ago?
Yeah.
I don't know. You can debate that. I'm not sure there might be a clear answer based on what perspective you're coming from. But yeah.
Okay. Uh, what does the future look like? And how can we prepare to embrace it and impact on our world in a positive and proactive way?
Yeah. Well, I think I don't have a crystal ball, but but
Because to say this is what the future is going to be, you say it now, it's going to change the next moment. So,
well, the fact is,
yeah,
we know change is going to occur, right? You think about the drivers of change, you think about technology, you think about the economic drivers or the, you know, regulatory or policy changes to organization drivers. You got society and culture and political. Our customers and our markets are going to change, and we as individuals are going to change, right? And so
yeah,
you look at change. I think of an experience that I had as you try to navigate what the future looks like. The first time I rode on a bullet train was in Japan. And I remember, Sam, looking out the window perpendicular. We were going so fast you couldn't make it out. And so what you had to do is you had to look way into the future to see what was coming, because when it got to your side, you couldn't make it out, right? And so as I think
that's a
about,
great analogy. Great analogy.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so when I think about the future, how do we go ahead and look ahead to understand, what changes could be coming, what changes are really, really, really important, and how do we begin the process of preparing for that, right? It would be like running a marathon. You didn't wake up this morning and go, okay, I'm going to run a marathon today. No, you look ahead and say, okay, I got 6 months to train. Here's what I'm going to do over the next 6 months to get ready for that event. I think that same view or same mentality might work in terms of the way we look into the future to understand, okay, here's the goals that I have, or here's what I anticipate is going to happen. Here's what I need to do today to prepare for that, to help me benefit from that change, or at least uh, not negatively be impacted by that change. So that would be how I would try to figure out what the future might look like.
Okay. Some more questions from the group. Gautam Ray, he is saying it's important to discuss on rate of change and sustainable approach, as we have seen in many occasions reversal to change happens. So rate of change, and he's talking of sustainability, because reversal to change also takes place. So, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things you hear a lot about today is the speed of change. Things are changing very quickly. Technology is probably the one thing that's driving that. Uh, but I would also offer the perspective that there's a lot of things that are not changing. And one thing is, you look at the pillars in which you base your life on. What are the things that are absolutely important to you? And you can name them off. And then you go, okay, they're not going to change. Those are the fundamentals in which I
The
believe.
core value, the
Yeah, your
core
core
value that
value.
we grew up with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So sometimes I feel in life right now, because of the pace of change. Remember as a kid when you used to just turn in circles all around and everything was moving really, really fast. And
yeah,
the perception was that everything was moving, but it wasn't. You were moving.
yeah.
Okay. And I think sometimes we get caught in this position where we think everything is changing. And so everything's going fast. We got to go fast. So I think that to me would be is trying to understand that, okay, there are some things that are changing fast. What are them? What are they? but not all things are changing that fast. Or not the whole world is not changing at the same speed across many different things. But I think
Yeah.
you're right in terms of understanding what your core values are, and they're not going to change uh, going forward.
Yeah, but then he had a good point there in his question about sustainability, that you try to make a change and how can you sustain that? There could be forces to negate that change. How do you, again, I guess resilience comes into picture at that time, and your leadership and everything else comes into picture, how you manage people and make sure that this happens. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think of number one, it was a great question because that sustainability is an interesting one because maybe not all things that we do or make decisions on are meant to be for a long period of time. They might be for a short period of time to get to another place. Uh, but I think, Sen, in the work I do with the Research Foundation, working with inventors and commercializing their intellectual property, the biggest thing that I find is the underestimation of what the competitive landscape is going to do. You know,
Mm.
they think they have the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they go, okay, everyone's going to love it. They're going to adapt to it. It's going to be great. But that's not the way the world works. The world works like, okay, the people that are in the market who have share today, they're going to fight back, or they're going to change, they're going to adapt, and everything else. And so, I guess to answer the question is relative to sustainability. Uh, it's important, but you might have to adapt to a response, whether it's a competitive response, it's a market response. The world changes. I have a quote that this is probably a good time. It was by Eddie Q. He's a senior vice president of services for Apple. And basically he says, we are highly successful. That doesn't mean we're going to be around 10 or 20 years down the line. You have to earn it every day in technology. We're not an oil company. We're not a toothpaste. These things are going to last forever. People are going to need toothpaste 20 years from now or 40 years from now. You may not need an iPhone 10 years from now, as crazy as it sounds. You have to earn it. You have to develop.
Wow, that's powerful. Yes. Never thought of it that way, but then, yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. And so, yeah. And that's where I think we come back full circle to the idea of embracing change as a vehicle to, uh, find commercial success, to find meaning in life, to all those things centers around our ability to embrace change and, make it be the wind in our sails, so to speak.
Yeah. Gautam had another question. He this is change planned with clear understanding of where we would like to arrive at, or it's push from the larger ecosystem?
Well, the answer could be yes. It just depends. It's interesting, though. I read recently McKinsey put out a report that says basically, and let's talk about it from an organization perspective, that 80% of the changes that are incorporated fail to reach their objectives. It's the same thing with acquisitions. Acquisitions, 80% of the time fail to live up to the expectations that were set when the two companies came together. And so, the idea of change just for the sake of change isn't enough. How do you effectively drive change from an organization perspective? And, what role does the economic realities or the marketplace play in driving that change? I worked for a family business that one of the family members said, "Why can't we just keep doing what we did 5 years ago?" And my answer to him was, because we'll go out of business if we don't change and adapt to what the market is demanding and what technology is allowing us to do. So, yeah.
Well, okay, so there are some more questions. Kaushik Das, can you present an example where an implemented change had inadvertent impact, both positive and negative? How do you ensure the changes you are going to drive accounts for the impact?
Again, I think from the standpoint of an organization, driving change is not easy because of the things we talked about earlier in terms of resistance, all that stuff that happens there. And so in terms of driving change, the clarity of what the mission is in terms of the change, what you want to change, why you want to change it, how you communicate that change, how do you create buy-in from the organization, not only, and empower them to make the changes necessary. All those things factor into it, and you got to keep at it, right? It's not one and done. You just don't put out a memo and everybody's going to change. You got to keep going, and depending on how deep the root is in terms of what you're trying to remove, it can take a lot of effort. It can take a lot of digging. And everything else to get to the roots. And then you got to replant what you want to put in there. So there's a certain amount of tenacity that you have to have going into it, and a commitment that what you're doing is correct for the organization, and people can see that.
And I'm sure you have done all of the above in every organization that you have been in, because making changes, how you communicate it, how the buy-ins are there. I have seen that happening at Argo itself.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Sen, the reason why you and I wear coats that cover our arms is because of the scars we have because of the mistakes we made, right? You know, and in a way, embrace it. Failure is not necessarily a bad thing. You recognize you tried something, it didn't work, move on. There has to be another way, right? If your intentions are good and they make sense, there might be another way of getting there. But you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail sometimes, and we all have, but that's okay. That's where the resilience comes back, and you bounce back, you get up, and you keep going. So,
Yep. There is Altna Doshi, and it is, Bob, I am from Tennessee.
all right.
In enterprise transformations, has the change management technique of current AI times changed, and how so?
Can you provide some clarity on that question, Sen?
Uh, well, that's the only thing that she has mentioned. Can we, Shapon, can we have Alpna unmuted, please? And Alpna can give some more clarity on the question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, hi Bob. Yeah. What I mean is that in most of the enterprises, I have run through a number of large transformations, and whether it is SAP, ERP, or whatever kind of business transformations, and change management has been always a critical factor where you're implementing the change through much of, human intervention and processes and procedures, mindset changes. But now with the AI technology introductions, do you see that the method of change management, is there like a different technique tool one has to apply to have that change management implemented?
Great question. My first answer is yes, there needs to be a change, quite frankly, because the success rate is only 20% in terms of organizations driving change, whether it's through, their SAP or whatever change they're trying to make. And so I think AI can help with that, but I also believe that change comes down to people. And how do we, as leaders, how do we, as managers, help drive change throughout organizations? And how do we deal with the people aspect of it? Because that doesn't change. How we operate as people, how we kind of approach change as human beings, I think has room for improvement. I'll give you another area that I find interesting is the area of engagement, and if you look across the last 10 years, there's been a lot written about engagement. There's been a lot of work done on engagement, but the numbers haven't changed. It's still 33% are engaged, 33% are somewhat engaged, and 33% are not engaged at all. And there's been a lot of stuff done, but there's been no change. So why is that? And I think trying to find those answers out as it relates to engagement, as it relates to change, and how we get people to buy into that for their benefit, to me, it needs to change. Don't ask me how yet, because I'm not sure of that.
All right. Thank you so much, Bob. Hope
You're
to
quite
see you in
welcome.
Tennessee.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on. What skills should, and this is from, it says Somerset Bengali Association. I don't know who this is. What skills people should develop to ride through changes and use it to its advantage? I think we have somewhat addressed this already, but then if there is anything else, Bob, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably addressed it, and I'll kind of reiterate. I mean, when you think about change, there's a few words that come to mind. I mean, discernment comes to mind, adaptability comes to mind, flexibility comes to mind. I think if you can develop a mental mindset that allows you to work in developing those skills and attributes, I think that will serve you well as it relates to change.
Okay, thanks. The next one is from Ornob. I have been part of organization development and change management initiatives in the past. Different perspectives with senior management and organizational politics often act as deterrent and recipe for failure. What's your advice to handle these adversaries while someone is determined to bring change in work culture, systems, and processes?
Yeah, if you don't have buy-in from the senior management team, it's very difficult to get change. I can address it more from, being part of upper management. The things that I did, for example, and Sen could confirm it. When I went out into, whether I went to see customers or I went to different parts of our organization, whether it was distribution centers or sales offices or whatever, the first thing I always did is I went into the warehouse and talked with the warehouse people. And one time someone approached me, "Why do you do that?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I want to tell those people that they're really important to the business and what they do is critical. Number two, if you really want to understand what's happening in the business, the people in the warehouse know. They know what customers are getting product. They know what product's coming back. They know all that stuff. And so I think that's important if maybe you can reverse it as if you're not in senior management of how do you create buy-in from a senior management level from where you sit? And, some of it is, hey, by asking questions, having, conversations about it, planting seeds in their head. They might come back and say, well, this is my idea, but if that gets the change you want, then so be it. So, but it's hard when you don't have senior buy-in to get something to happen.
Okay, let's proceed. This is from Shukanto Kumar Roy. He's senior to me in college. His question is, when does a company revisit its core values and why? And its core values and why do they do so, basically? And his second question is, as a leader or CEO, what would you do if the changes you believe is necessary isn't working? How do you address the issues and move forward?
Yeah, let me just the second one. If they're not working, I guess the first thing is you got to understand why aren't they working? All right, and understand, is it I'm not being clear enough? I'm not articulating what the changes are that I want to see happen. Is there a breakdown in communication that it's not getting down through the organization? Is there inconsistency between what I'm trying to articulate and what I'm doing? So, it's kind of looking in the mirror first, and then you go from there and try to understand where the breakdown could occur and where it's occurring. Is it occurring in one group, or is it occurring across the whole organization, or is it stopped? It's only gotten so far down and it's broken down going forward. So I think just trying to understand why it's not working and before you maybe change course and things of that nature. And the first point,
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
tell me ask the first question again.
What would you do? Sorry. The first question was, when does a company revisit change or change its core values, and why does it do so?
Yeah, I would like to think that the core values would not change very much. I mean, they should be, to me, like pillars in the ground, that they're not movable if they're done correctly. Now, not just because you go through an exercise and create core values, that doesn't necessarily mean it was well done, or maybe they're not what they should be. So I wouldn't, if you're going to have core values, do it right. Make sure that they are meaningful and they will run the test of time. Now, that doesn't mean there might be something that you might want to add or change at some point in time, but that should not be a daily exercise. That should be your North Star in terms of sticking to those.
We are just about on time. So I don't think there are. Oh, one more question. So you have 5 more minutes, Bob?
Yeah, no problem.
All right. So Indranil Shah has sent this question. What are some of the mistakes one tends to make in empowering people to make change? Or what are the different choices one has in giving people agency? I don't understand. In my mind, the moment one says to people, you have agency to do this, the exact opposite happens. I don't understand the agency part of it. Probably giving responsibility to a person, maybe
Yeah,
you have the
maybe.
responsibility to do it, or you are, yeah, kind of something like that, I
Meaning
guess.
empowerment. By
Giving
agency,
yeah,
empowerment.
empowerment.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank
So
you,
is it
Shukanta.
saying by given empowerment, it doesn't happen? Is that, did I read that question again? So,
No, I will read that question again. What are some of the mistakes one tends to make in empowering people to make change? Or what are the different choices one has in giving people agency? In my mind, the moment one says to people, you have agency to do this, the exact opposite happens.
okay. I think back to the idea. There's two things I think of. One is, as a leader, don't assume. Don't assume that uh, the message is being heard. Don't assume that it's being carried out. Don't assume. So I think back to President Reagan in the 80s that talked about trust but verify. And so within, as a leader, you want to instill trust, you want to empower, but you got to verify, you got to have accountability to make sure it does happen. And don't assume would be my response to that.
Okay. All right. I think that's all. So thank you, Bob, for your time and sharing your insights. We are extremely grateful to you. Thank you all who took the time to join this session. Hopefully, you have had a couple of takeaways from these discussions that you can try out yourselves and get benefited. The session has been recorded, so you can always refer to it at a later time. And feel free to pass it on to any other student or alumni who may find this of interest. So, again, thank you all. Have a good weekend. Bob, you have any closing remark?
Yeah, no, yeah, I guess I do. In terms of, I appreciate the opportunity to participate within this group, and thank you for being here and being part of this. And thank you, Sen, for the opportunity to be with you and spend some time together.
Thank you. Thanks again, Bob.